Hello, welcome to this issue of Discovering Truth at the Movies. Hi, my name is David Lance. Today in this episode, I'm going to begin the process of telling the story of the Chronicles of Belteshazzar by introducing Dr. Dr. Sarah in chapter 1, as well as her 4 nephews. My daughter, Sarah, graduated magna cum laude in biology from Anderson University, and from there she went on to IU Medical School. She became the president of the Christian and Medical and Dental Society there at IU, and then went on to 5 years of residency at Carolina's Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. In this book I'm working on that eventually I hope to publish, it's called The Chronicles of Belteshazzar. It's targeted towards kids in grades 4th through 9th grade, approximately ages 9 through 15. It's the story of Daniel in Babylon as told by a grandfather to his grandsons who come to spend the weekend with their grandparents. Now, if you've ever seen the movie The Princess Bride, you might recall that Peter Falk plays a grandfather who's reading a story about true love to his sick grandson. And so if you've not seen that, you want to go on YouTube and look up the trailer for that. You'll get the picture of it. But that's what I sort of hope to be doing in this setting. And want to invite you to consider joining with me as I read each chapter about once every other week and provide a little bit of commentary. As I said, I'll read a chapter once a week. I'll include a question for reflection, and I'll also post these episodes both as Facebook Live, maybe eventually there on my YouTube channel, as well as on my podcast, Discovering Truth at the Movies. And because the podcast deals with movies, there will always be some sort of a reference to a movie in terms of the overall thing that I'm talking about. You can sign up for more information, provide me your email, and I'll send you out information whenever I'm going to do these broadcasts, as well as the actual written text of the chapter that I'm working on for that particular episode. And so eventually, like I said, I hope to publish this as a full-blown book, both on the Kindle and perhaps hopefully as a regular book. So without further ado, let me begin with chapter 1, which is titled Auntie Dr. Sarah in the Chronicles of Belteshazzar. Excuse me while I take a drink of water. Okay, let's go. Dr. Sarah Michelle Lance sat on a park bench as her 4 nephews, Isaac, Matthew, Josiah, and Gabriel, played nearby. It was a fall day in mid-September. The leaves were just beginning to turn color. It was a time of year she always enjoyed in her hometown of Indianapolis. As the song went, it was good to be back home in Indiana. Sarah returned her eyes to her Bible. It was open to chapter 6 of the book of Daniel. She began to read verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. But just as she began her reading, 2 hands covered her eyes. Guess who? Squeaked a high-pitched voice that trailed off with a slight crack at the end of the question. There's no hiding the fact that her 12-year-old nephew would soon experience a deepening in his voice as he approached his teenage years. Well, said Dr. Sarah, it can't be Josiah or Gabriel because they're not tall enough to reach my eyes. At 5 feet 9 inches, Auntie Dr. Sarah, as her nephews called her, even when sitting, was way too tall for either of her 2 younger nephews, ages 7 and 5 years respectively, to easily reach. And it's not me, announced a confident 10-year-old Matthew. Of the 4 boys, his dark hair and olive skin color most reminded anyone looking at them of their father, Jason. It was a hair and skin color combination that Auntie Dr. Sarah shared with her younger brother. Well, announced Sarah in her most authoritative surgeon's voice, that can only leave one other person who has his hands over my eyes. It's Isaac. She and Isaac announced this conclusion as, with one motion, she put her Bible down on the park bench and she was sitting on and pulled her oldest nephew around in front of her. How did you know it was that I didn't pick up Gabriel and have him put his hands over your eyes? Said Isaac. Because he's with Josiah over there going up and down the slide, silly, replied Auntie Dr. Sarah as she pointed in Gabriel's direction. The second grader looked up when he heard his voice, his name, and saw his aunt motioning in his direction. Josiah grabbed Gabriel, and the two younger boys came over to join their older brothers to see what they were talking about. Unlike Matthew, both Josiah's and Gabriel's hair was sandy brown, similar to that of their mother's. Josiah's skin was darker than Isaac's, while Gabriel's skin was fair like his older brother's. For his part, Isaac towered over his younger brother at 5'7". Always tall for his age, he was very proud of the fact that he was nearly in the 90th percentile for his age. His other distinguishing characteristic was that he had dark red hair. This was a curious genetic trick that God had played on his own parental grandmother, who was 100% Chinese. Auntie Dr. Sarah, said Isaac as he decided to sit beside his aunt, do you know what happened to me at school yesterday? No, because you haven't told me, replied his aunt. What happened? Well, you remember how I told you two people came to school last week to hand out Gideon Bibles to whomever wanted one? Well, I was outside during lunch yesterday, and I was flipping through my Gideon Bible that I'd just gotten. It was really small print. I was looking for a story from the Old Testament, but when I figured out that it was only a New Testament Bible, plus Proverbs and Psalms, a girl named Mary came along, ripped it out of my hands, and yelled, "Separation of church and state," while she ran off with my Bible. What did you do? Asked Matthew. Did you chase after her? Yes, I did. And when I started to catch up with her, she threw my Bible into some bushes. I stopped to get it, and she ran off to a group of her friends. Did you tell the teacher? I would have told the teacher, stated an emphatic Josiah. No, answered Isaac. I wasn't sure if I was doing something that was wrong. Isaac looked down at his feet and then back at his aunt. Auntie Dr. Sarah, do you think I was doing something that was wrong, reading my Bible at school? Absolutely not, she replied. You know, when your dad and I were very small, Grandpa used to have us act out Bible stories. One of those stories was Daniel in the lion's den. Matthew perked right up at the mention of the story. I know about that story. Didn't he get thrown in jail because he prayed to God? Yes, that's right. Only the jail was the den where the lions lived, replied Aunt Sarah. Say, aren't you boys going to spend next weekend with Grandpa and Nai? Yes, we are, said Josiah excitedly. We're going to camp out in the sunroom. Grandpa always sleeps with us when we do. Sarah extended her long arms and pulled the four boys close to her. In a hushed but excited voice, she smiled and said, well, you should ask Grandpa to tell you the story of all the adventures that Daniel had. The prophet Daniel lived in a time when very few people believed the word of God. Grandpa loves to tell about that kind of thing. Would you like him to tell you stories about how Daniel had to deal with the people who didn't believe in God? Can we eat popcorn and stay up real late? Josiah bounced up and down as he waited for Auntie Dr. Sarah to answer. You know, I am pretty sure that if Nai says yes, then Grandpa will say yes too. Tell you what, I'll talk to Grandpa so he can get everything ready. Okay? Will you be there too? Asked Matthew. Aunt Sarah gave the top of Matthew's head a quick brushing and answered, nope. I have to work at the hospital this weekend. It's my turn to be in surgery rotation to fix people up when they get hurt. But I'll expect you boys to tell me all about it when I see you next time. Aunt Sarah looked at her watch. Well, guys, it's time to go home. I promised your mom and dad that I'd have you back in time to wash up for supper. Come on, my car is parked just over there. As the boys followed their aunt to her car, Isaac realized that he had forgotten to ask what the phrase separation of church and state meant. He hoped he would remember to ask Grandpa when he saw him next. I want to spend a moment and provide a bit of a personal reflection. First of all, the story of the Bible being taken by a girl at school and thrown into the bushes is true. It didn't happen to my grandson, however. It happened to me when I was in 8th grade junior high. And so I've remembered that story for a long time. And certainly when I read and had my kids act out the story of Daniel in the lion's den, I've thought about that particular instance over the years. One of the things that I want to mention is that my daughter Sarah decided that she would become a missionary surgeon at the age of 16. When she was at the age of 17 in 1998, or about that time, a movie by the name of Patch Adams came out. Stars Robin Williams. He played a real life doctor by the name of Henry Adams, known as Patch, who basically, while he was going to medical school, really didn't like the very clinical aspect of the way the doctors treated patients. And he promised himself that he would work on treating the whole person. He wanted to use humor to make people laugh and things of that nature. And so one of the things that my daughter Sarah got from watching that movie was the idea that it was very important for a doctor to develop very good patient-doctor relationships. And so while my daughter Sarah worked very hard at her studies as a undergraduate student at Anderson University, finishing magna cum laude in biology, when she went to IU Medical School, she told me that, well, of course she was going to work hard to learn everything that the professors had to teach her. She was not going to overly fret about her grade point average and her standing in class rank, but rather she would cultivate that kind of personality that she saw demonstrated by Robin Williams as he played Patch Adams in treating the whole patient. You know, there is a scene from that movie where Robin Williams as Patch Adams is with a bunch of children in a cancer ward. And two statements that he makes somewhere in the movie are like this. You treat a disease, you win, you lose. You treat a person, I guarantee you'll win no matter what the outcome. Our job is improving the quality of life, not just delaying death. And that's something that my daughter, as she spent 5 years in residency at Carolinas Medical Center, and then went on to Mukingi Hospital in early 2014 in Zambia, carried with her throughout her life as she practiced medicine and learned to be a doctor who treated the whole person. You know, that brings me to a discussion question that you might want to have with your kids, your grandkids, or the next time you're at the dinner table and you're having these sorts of thoughts. Here's the question. You know, when you treat a person, you're not just patching up cuts, bruises, and bumps. You're also helping to heal a broken heart or a troubled soul. How does spending time with those you love help to treat and heal the whole person? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this particular message. It's going to be on Facebook as a Facebook Live post. Eventually, I'll get it onto YouTube. But you can go to the web link here that I've put on the screen. You can pause it and then write the whole thing down. But I'll be sure to put a link into a landing page where you can sign up to be notified whenever I do these sorts of things, as well as be able to download the current chapter. I'll also send you my monthly newsletter, Conversation with the Culture. I've been using movies to talk about God's word and things in the culture since 2005. And so this is part of that sequence. And so also my podcast is at davidlantz.podomatic.com. My last name is Lantz, Lantz. So hope that you've enjoyed this time of looking at this and the first maiden voyage of chapter 1, Anti-Dr. Sarah in the Chronicles of Belteshazzar.